Imagine this. You come home from a VA rehab program, park in the same disabled spot you've used for years. And a week later, a plain envelope says you owe the city $25,000 in parking fines. That number is why Daniel Miller was in municipal court. The room was the usual morning docket. Humming lights, worn benches, a cluster of people with small worries and small tickets. Nothing here was supposed to matter for long. "Daniel Miller?" the clerk called. He rose and walked to the podium. Two prosthetic legs met the tile in a steady, muted rhythm. No limp, no cane, no drama. Just the practiced balance of a man who had learned to move forward with what was left of him. Conversations thinned, a few heads turned, then quickly looked away. His jacket hung a little loose on his frame. His hair was clipped short. He kept his eyes on the bench, not the rows behind him. The judge opened a thin file and read in a flat, workday tone. City of Providence versus Daniel Miller. Multiple violations for illegal parking, failure to respond, tow and storage fees. Total balance due. He stopped. $25,070. The clerk's typing stopped too. A chair in the back creaked, then went still. The ordinary courtroom noise drained into a thick, uneasy silence. In the first row, a woman in a dark cardigan wrapped both hands around her handbag and stared at the floor. The judge looked up at last and saw the metal below Daniel's pant cuffs, the polished rods where ankles should have been. "Mr. Miller," he said slowly, "how does anyone get to $25,000 in parking tickets?" Daniel's fingers locked together on the rail. His knuckles were pale, but his voice stayed level. "Your Honor, I didn't even know my car had been towed." No anger. No long explanation. Just a short sentence that made the number on the page sound even more absurd. The judge leaned forward. "Where have you been the last 3 months, sir?" The question seemed to land on every shoulder in the room. Even the officer by the door looked up. "In the hospital," Daniel answered. "Complications from surgery." He left it at that. As he shifted, one pant leg slid back. The courtroom camera caught a small, cracked plastic tag wired to his left prosthetic. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear enough. Vide Medical Center. Inpatient. It looked as if he had come straight from that ward to this podium. In the front row, the woman in the cardigan flinched when she saw it. Her shoulders rose, her grip on the bag tightened. For a brief moment, she lifted her head. Their eyes almost met. She dropped her gaze so quickly it seemed rehearsed. She knew Daniel Miller. And she was pretending she didn't. He waited for the judge's next question with the same composed stillness he'd walked in with. No adjusting of the jacket. No restless movement. Just that quiet readiness of a man who had learned long ago how to stand or sit his ground. Caprio spoke gently, choosing his words with care. "Sir, what do you do for a living?" A small pause, then the answer came, steady and matter-of-fact. 19 years, United States Army, Afghanistan deployment. The room reacted with a subtle shift. The kind older Americans feel deep in their chest, respect mixed with sorrow. But he didn't lean on either. His tone gave no invitation for applause or admiration. The judge nodded slowly, but something in the file clearly bothered him. "Your injuries," he began cautiously, "were they connected to your service?" The man inhaled once, almost like bracing himself, not for pity, but for memory. "No, sir, not overseas." He tapped the edge of his small notebook, a habit he seemed barely aware of. "Back home. A drunk driver hit my truck. He walked out with probation." A few people in the gallery exchanged looks, the kind that say of course he did, the kind shaped by years of watching imperfect justice unfold. The man didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the judge, refusing to let bitterness color his voice. "After the crash," he continued, "I was either in surgery or learning how to move again. Months at a time, lost my job, lost my place for a while. He spoke evenly, but each sentence carried the heaviness of someone forced to rebuild life from a foundation that no longer existed. Caprio glanced at the dates again, his brow tightening. And during those months, the vehicle outside your building kept getting ticketed? He nodded. Neighbors filed complaints, said it looked abandoned, city tagged it. I couldn't get out of the hospital to move it. He thumbed the corner of his notebook. I tried calling, tried writing. Nobody responded. The judge's gaze softened, not out of pity, but recognition. He'd seen bureaucracy swallow people whole before. The man added quietly, I'm not embarrassed about needing help, but I am embarrassed it came to this. He lowered his eyes, the first sign that being here cost him more than he let on. Feels like I should have handled it somehow. From the gallery came a low, understanding murmur. Older men nodded, women pressed their lips together, recognizing that particular American burden, the fear of being seen as a complainer even when the system clearly failed you. Then, the notebook caught Caprio's attention. May I ask, he said gently, you keep notes? The man hesitated, then opened it with a careful movement. Inside were short lines, dates, reminders written in tight, deliberate handwriting. Memory's not the same, he admitted quietly. Doctors say it happens after certain injuries. So I write down anything important, places I called, people I spoke to, things I didn't want to forget. No drama, no self-praise, just a simple truth laid out plainly. A ripple of empathy passed through the room, the kind that doesn't need words. The judge leaned forward, not as a distant authority, but as a man truly listening. And for the first time since entering the courtroom, the veteran's shoulders eased just barely, as if the act of being heard lifted a weight he'd carried far too long. The judge studied the notebook for a long moment before returning his attention to the man. Something wasn't adding up, and the courtroom could feel the shift, the air sharpening the way it does when a conversation stops being routine and starts becoming consequential. Caprio folded his hands. Let me ask you something, he said quietly. Why didn't you challenge the tickets earlier, before they grew into this? Not an accusation, more like a door he was gently pushing open. The veteran exhaled and flipped to another page, his fingers unsteady now. I tried, he said. I came here once, about a year back. I had my medical papers with me. He hesitated, then added, but I never got past the front desk. A small rustle moved through the gallery. The judge's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in concentration. What do you mean you didn't get past the desk? The man looked down at his notes as if verifying his own memory. I was told my case was already with a collection agency, he said, that I had to pay the full amount before speaking to anyone. Caprio leaned toward the computer screen, scrolling through the digital record with deliberate care. The clerk angled her monitor slightly, scanning alongside him. After a moment, Caprio shook his head. There's nothing here about a transfer, he said slowly. No record of this ever leaving the municipal system. A deeper silence fell, the type that signals people realizing they've stepped into something bigger than a routine dispute. The judge looked up. Are you certain that's what you were told? The man nodded once. Exact words. Caprio's jaw tightened. He asked for the address on file. The clerk read it out, and the man winced, not dramatically, but with a tired kind of recognition. That's not where I live, he said. Haven't lived there since the accident. I updated everything with the DMV when they issued my disability plates. Another ripple of murmurs passed through the room. The judge pressed his fingertips together, thinking, then asked, Did the city send all notices to that old address? The clerk checked again, then answered quietly, Yes, Your Honor. The implications landed heavily. Every warning, every hearing date, every escalation had gone to a place he no longer called home. The judge let out a slow breath. So, You never saw the letters that said your fines were increasing? He stated, rather than asked. No, sir. The veteran's voice thinned at the edges. I only found out when my neighbor mentioned a boot notice taped to my car. The room stirred uneasily, older listeners especially, recognizing how one clerical oversight could snowball into catastrophe for someone already fighting uphill. The veteran turned another page in his notebook, searching for something he didn't seem quite ready to share. His thumb trembled against the paper. Finally, he looked up. I tried to explain all this when I came, but they sent me away. Those last words hung in the air. No anger, no dramatics, just a tired resignation that struck harder than any raised voice could. Judge Caprio straightened in his chair, the warmth of earlier replaced by a focused, almost surgical attention. His expression said what no one else dared. Something here is very wrong. And the courtroom felt it, the tension stretching taut, like a cable pulled towards an inevitable snap. The judge's tone shifted, firm now. We're going to find out exactly what happened. The promise didn't echo. It sank, deep, steady, and unmistakably serious. The judge signaled to the clerk with a small motion of his hand. It wasn't dramatic, but everyone sensed the weight behind it. This wasn't routine anymore. This was a probe. A staff member stepped forward, a middle-aged court clerk with a careful gait, the kind of civil servant who knew the procedures by heart. She stopped beside the bench, hands clasped tightly, as if bracing for questions she'd rather not answer. Caprio kept his tone neutral. I need clarification, he said. Walk me through how notices are handled when a vehicle receives multiple citations. The clerk glanced at the veteran, then back at the judge. Standard process, Your Honor. Automated printouts. They go to the address listed in the motor vehicle database. If mail is returned, it's flagged. Caprio tapped the veteran's file. There's no flag here. No, sir. He leaned forward slightly. And we do not send letters stating a case has been transferred to collections unless the system actually initiates that step. Correct? Correct! The judge's voice lowered, gaining an edge that carried all the way to the back row. Then explain why this man received written notice telling him he couldn't speak to anyone here unless he paid the full balance. The clerk blinked, thrown off. We don't produce letters like that. There's no template for it. The room tightened again. A collective inhale held in uneasy anticipation. Caprio extended his hand toward the veteran. May I see the document you mentioned? The man opened his notebook, flipping carefully until he found the folded page. Its edges were softened from being handled too often, maybe too nervously. He passed it forward. Caprio unfolded it slowly, almost ceremonially. His eyes scanned the text once, then again, more sharply. The lines on his forehead deepened. This, he said at last, holding it between two fingers, is not one of ours. A few people in the courtroom whispered under their breath. Someone muttered an incredulous, "You've got to be kidding," before going silent again. The judge studied the letter closer. The cheap paper, the formatting slightly off, the wording too casual for an official notice. Then he looked up, gaze steady. Who gave this to you? The veteran shifted in his chair, reluctant, as if saying the name might start a conflict he wasn't sure he wanted. Finally, my building manager. He slipped it under my door the week I came home from the hospital. Caprio didn't move. He didn't need to. The silence that followed did all the speaking for him. A building manager. Someone with access. Someone who could influence whether a car stayed or went. Someone who could benefit from removing what they viewed as an eyesore from prime parking. Had provided a fake official document. The implications spread across the room like a cold draft. The clerk stepped closer, voice subdued. Your Honor, if this letter wasn't generated here, someone tried to impersonate the court. The judge placed the paper carefully on the bench, flattening it with his palm. That's exactly what concerns me, he said. The veteran looked down at his hands, rubbing a thumb over an old dent in the metal of his wheelchair frame. A nervous habit no one had noticed before. He wasn't angry. He looked tired, as if realizing how much deeper the maze went than he'd imagined. Caprio's eyes swept the courtroom, seeing not just the man before him, but the broader truth beneath the surface. This wasn't a clerical error. It was deliberate interference. The tension in the room shifted from sympathy to controlled outrage. Older spectators exchanged glances. This was the kind of behavior they'd seen too many times in housing complexes, neighborhood associations, places where small authority could grow into quiet menace. Caprio pressed the letter flat once more and said, with a calm that felt almost dangerous, "We're going to address this fully." And in that moment, even the walls seemed to lean in, sensing the storm about to break. For a long stretch of seconds, Judge Caprio didn't speak. He simply looked at the forged letter lying on the bench, as though the weight of what it represented required a moment of stillness, the kind that comes not from hesitation, but from moral calculation. The veteran watched him carefully, posture tightening the way a soldier braces for impact. He wasn't afraid of a fine. He was afraid of hearing that none of this mattered. At last, Caprio leaned back, exhaled slowly, and folded his hands. "You know," he said, his voice level but strikingly direct, "the most disturbing part of this isn't the dollar amount. It isn't even the mistakes that piled up." He paused, not theatrically, but with purpose. "It's that you came to believe your voice carried no weight." The veteran's eyes flickered downward, as if those words hit a place he usually kept locked away. In the gallery, someone let out a soft, involuntary sigh. It was the kind of sentence older Americans feel in their bones, the quiet truth that bureaucracies break people long before they break rules. Caprio continued, gentler now, but no less firm. "You tried to be heard, and instead of answers, you were handed a deception designed to push you out of the way." The veteran swallowed hard, staring at the bench as though trying to hold himself steady. Then the judge straightened a few papers, unnecessary, except to mark a turning point. "As for these fines," Caprio said, his tone shifting into clarity, "every single one of them, along with the penalties and added fees, is hereby nullified. Not reduced, not adjusted. Nullified." His gaze pinned the clerk. The notifications were sent to an outdated address. Legally, they cannot stand. The courtroom reacted in a wave of hushed relief. Not applause, not cheering, just the fading pressure of collective breath being released. A few people nodded with quiet satisfaction, the way one might respond to a long overdue correction. But Caprio wasn't finished. He lifted the forged letter again, holding it delicately by the corner. "This is not a clerical error," he said. "This is a deliberate attempt to impersonate this court." The room went still all over again. "I am forwarding this to the city's internal review division," he announced, "and they will determine whether your building manager, or anyone else, interfered with your legal rights." The veteran blinked, stunned. For the first time since entering the courtroom, something in his expression cracked. Not a tear, not a breakdown, but a subtle tremor in the jaw, the look of someone who had braced for the worst and suddenly found the ground shifting in the opposite direction. Caprio lowered his voice. "Sir, the system failed you. That is not something I say lightly." From the back row came a faint, instinctive ripple of applause before people remembered themselves and stopped, not out of rudeness, but out of reverence for the moment. What remained was a deep, resonant quiet. The veteran lifted his hand slightly, as if uncertain what to do with the sudden absence of threat. He breathed out, shaky but controlled, and said only, "I didn't come here expecting this. I just needed someone to listen." It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was a confession, the kind of small, raw honesty that hits harder than any dramatic speech. Caprio gave a single nod, one professional but unmistakably human. "Well," he said softly, "you were heard." Nothing more needed to be added. The courtroom held its silence, not as emptiness, but as respect. A stillness that acknowledged both the suffering and the dignity of the man at the center of it all. The crisis, legally, was resolved. But something deeper had just begun to shift. The judge gathered the papers on his bench as if preparing to close the chapter. The tension that had filled the room so thickly earlier had settled into something steadier. Not relief exactly, but a sense of restored balance. Still, the veteran didn't move. His hands rested on the rims of his chair, frozen in a moment of hesitation. "Your Honor," he said quietly. Caprio paused, surprised. The man had spoken so sparingly throughout the hearing that this small request felt unexpectedly intimate. "If I may," the veteran continued, "there's something I need to say before I go." The judge gave a small nod, the kind that invited truth without pressure. The man drew a breath, steadying himself. "I was afraid to roll into this room," he admitted. "Afraid I'd be treated like a problem on a screen, like someone who slipped through the cracks and wasn't worth pulling back out." His voice didn't shake, but there was a rawness beneath it, the kind that comes only when a person speaks from a place they rarely allow anyone to see. "You didn't just sort out some tickets," he said softly. "You gave me back the feeling that I still belong in this city." The gallery held absolutely still. No shuffling, no whispers. Older listeners leaned in without meaning to, absorbing the weight of the words. It wasn't flattery. It was a man reclaiming connection to a place he had spent years feeling exiled from. Caprio didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose, slowly, without theatrics, stepped down from the bench and walked toward the veteran. No speech, no pronouncement, just a simple gesture. He extended his hand. The veteran stared at it for a moment, then reached out. Their handshake wasn't grand or prolonged. It was a quiet seal of respect between two people who understood each other without needing more language. A few spectators lowered their gaze, not out of discomfort, but because the moment felt almost private, something sacred in its simplicity. When the judge returned to his seat, the veteran turned his wheelchair toward the exit. For the first time since entering, his posture seemed lighter. Not physically, but in the way someone moves when a burden has shifted off their shoulders. He was nearly at the door when a woman stepped forward from one of the back rows. She looked to be in her late 40s, dressed plainly, her hands clasped together, as if unsure whether she should speak. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I didn't want to interrupt earlier." The veteran blinked in surprise. Recognition flickered. "You live in my building," he said. She nodded. "I do. And, if it helps, I'm willing to testify about the letters. I saw the manager slipping those papers under your door more than once. I knew something wasn't right." He stared at her, not suspicious, not overwhelmed, just struck by the unexpected sense of an ally he hadn't known he had. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying a different tone than before, less guarded, more grounded. She gave a small, firm nod. "You shouldn't have had to go through that alone." He didn't answer, not because he had nothing to say, but because the moment didn't require anything more. As he left the courtroom, the silence that followed him wasn't empty. It was reverence, the kind that lingers when people witness something honest, something bigger than a single case. Justice had been served, yes, but something far more human had been restored. And though the road ahead hinted at further fights, he no longer faced them as a man unnoticed. He left as a man seen.